Hi, this is Kyle Blakely with Mark Waller, and this is another episode of We Have Issues, the podcast that looks at the political issues impacting us in Colorado with an extra look at issues in the Pikes Peak region since we live here. Remember to subscribe on YouTube, and you can also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Mark, how are you today?
I'm good. I'd be better if more people would subscribe. We're getting loads of views of this podcast, but very few subscribers. So we need people to up our numbers and please subscribe. I got to tell you, I'm also a little jealous today, Kyle.
Of?
You.
Oh.
I was in a breakfast this morning you may or may not have been at, the Colorado Springs State of the City address.
I was there.
850 people, something ridiculous like that. Parking was terrible. Traffic was horrible. I was about to lose my mind over that. And then what do I see? To my absolute delight, my podcast partner on the big screen in front of 850 people talking about how great Richard Skorman, former city council member and Colorado Springs legend is. It was amazing.
Yeah, that was fun. I was happy to see Richard get honored as kind of the person of the year by the mayor. And, I've known Richard for 25 years. And so I was really happy I had a chance to be on the video. Not very long, but long enough that I do have a few Hollywood agents already reaching out to me, wanting to know, what my plans are for my future acting career. And so from that standpoint, it was successful.
I just started yelling from my seat, "Hey, I know that guy. I know that guy. I know that guy."
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was fun.
Boy, what a great honor for Skorman, to be the, what is it? Lifetime Achievement Award for all he's done in Colorado Springs.
Yeah. When you sit back and look at it, it's pretty amazing what all he's done and worked on and been involved in and still is. I mean, it was a Lifetime Achievement Award, but he's still doing stuff. So he could win it again in a few years.
Yeah, one of the most humble guys you'll ever meet, too.
True.
And people who are truly in it for the right reasons.
Yep. In fact, I always thought, to a certain degree, Richard was too nice for politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've thought that too. He was the president of the city council when I chaired the Board of County Commissioners here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so we had a chance to work together a lot. And he was always, I always thought he was one of the most thoughtful, or the most thoughtful person on that panel, and just one of my absolute favorites to work with. We didn't agree on a ton politically. A lot. Yeah, absolutely. We agreed on. Everybody wants to move the community forward in a positive direction. Sometimes we disagreed on how you do that. But I'll tell you, he was just an absolute pleasure and a delight to work with. And, certainly one of my favorite people from the city when I was working with them as a county commissioner.
Yeah, one of the things I always love is if you talk to Richard for any length of time, and if an issue comes up, he is so well versed on all the critical issues, and he can tell you where to go and look and find more information, dig deeper. I can't imagine how much he reads and studies, and maybe not now as quite as much as he did when he was on council, but just you pick a topic and he seemed to know about it. So,
well, Colorado College grad, right? That's where the smart kids go to school.
Yes. My wife's a CC grad. Richard's a CC grad. As I like to say, you can't swing a dead cat in this town without hitting a CC. So
a few of those, it looks like the only toll it's cost him is all of his hair. I was surprised to see the ponytail and the big mustache in all of those pictures they were showing earlier today. I'm like, holy shit, is that the same guy?
Yeah, that was funny. That was fun to see. So
good dude.
Yeah, so a breakfast at the Broadmoor this morning. I would say they're lucky their 5-star rating isn't dependent on the operation of their parking garage.
Well, that and quite frankly, the breakfast sucked.
Oh, I see. I was fine with the breakfast.
Cold by the time it got to me. Yeah, parking sucked, traffic sucked. But it was fun. It's always a good time to get out and see a bunch of people you haven't seen in a long time, hug a lot of folks, and hear what's going on in the city, which is always the same thing. We're looking forward to growing and filling potholes.
Yeah, exactly. I would at some point like to talk to an engineer about parking garage ventilation because we were in our car with the car running for 30 minutes on the third floor down underground. And with all that carbon monoxide from the cars in there, there's got to be amazing ventilation. You have a lot of when you're sitting there for 35 minutes, you have time to think about a lot of things.
That or you got some problems now.
Maybe it was the effects of the carbon monoxide that were messing with me as far as what I was sitting there pondering while I was trying to get out of traffic. So
You're now going to support the weed initiative in Colorado Springs.
yes,
Passage of that.
yes, absolutely. So we had that this morning, and then tonight we have the big national debate with Kamala and Donald. So
yeah, we're filming on Tuesday, but this comes out on Thursday. The debate will have happened, but we don't know at this point
exactly
what has happened or what is going to happen. But I'm going to call it here. Trump's going to be abusive, and he's not going to be able to help himself. And thank God they're muting the microphones when it's not your turn to talk.
Very true. Very true.
And Kamala Harris is not going to explain any more than the not even 30,000-foot view of her policy implications, but the 100,000-foot view of her policy implications that she's given us thus far.
And tomorrow, I'm predicting that half of the posts I see on Twitter will be in favor of Donald, and the other half will be in favor of her. So,
and I will tell you, I mean, everybody knows what they're going to get out of Trump. It's what they're going to get out of Harris. She has a chance to, set herself apart, or she has a chance to lose some ground here. And I think right now this is anybody's race to win.
what it looks like with the polls that are coming out, it does look like it's pretty much a dead heat. Just New York Times poll has him ahead nationally again. Some of the other polls I've seen have her doing pretty well in a little bit more than half of the battleground states. I haven't looked at any projections as far as delegates to see who might be ahead in that standpoint, but it seems to be close all the way around. And I really I really would like to watch tonight, but I think I'm just not sure if I can bring myself to do it and torture myself for 90 minutes of it.
Oh, we got to do it, Kyle. Got to do it. I'll watch for both of us. Hey, speaking of polls and political races, do you know what the podcast is about today?
I do. We have the two candidates for Senate District 12 here in the Pikes Peak region, Stan Vanderwerf and Marc Snyder, running against each other. We have both of them on today. We're going to have them back to back. And so I'm looking forward to talking to both of them. You know both of them probably better than I do. I know them both a little bit. So I think it should be a fun conversation today.
Well, just by virtue of the fact that they're running for the Senate, they're both assholes. So no, I'm kidding. One of my old friends, Bob Gardner, I think he'll allow me to quote him here. He went from the House to the Senate, 65 members of the House, 35 members of the Senate. So twice as many in the House as in the Senate. And somebody said, well, Senator, now that you're here, what's the difference between the House and the Senate? And he said, half as many people, twice as many assholes. And I thought, well, that describes it perfectly. Being an old House member myself. So
nice.
No, it's going to be fun to hear from both of them. Again, of those 35 Senate seats, about half of them are up this year. Democrats are looking at maybe if they gain a seat, having a supermajority in the Senate. But if they don't, they won't.
And this would be a seat they could pick up if
And
Mark
this would be a
wins.
pickup opportunity. Again, Bob Gardner's seat, Republican, but it's a razor thin margin, and it's one of the, probably 4, maybe 5 most important Senate races in the state this year. And with that, I see that Representative Snyder is in the waiting room. So let's bring him in, and we will grill him with all of
Yes.
our hard-hitting questions. Because this podcast is about serious issues seriously all the time. Representative, how are you?
I'm fine, Mr. Waller. How are you?
We're doing well. We were just talking about how hard we're going to grill you with all of the questions today about your Senate race.
I'm ready for it, but first let me say that Kyle got a wonderful shout out from Mayor Yemi's State of the City today. They actually put his picture up there, and they said he was campaign manager for Richard Scorman, which I hadn't remembered.
So you were at the breakfast too. We could have just done all these interviews at the breakfast.
Everybody was there. I missed you.
Sat at the same table.
I told Kyle I was jealous because he was on the screen, and I was like, standing up yelling, I know that guy. I know that guy.
So they interviewed me for about 30 minutes and used 12 seconds. So that gives you some idea of how good I must have been.
Well, I thought it was very classy to recognize Richard Scorman. He has been a big force down here for a long time and deserves a little bit of accolade.
We should have brought you in 10 minutes ago. We just spent, like 7 minutes talking about how great Richard Scorman is.
Oh, well, I would have been happy to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, he was the president of the council when I was the chair of the Board of County Commissioners. So we got to work together a lot. We didn't always agree on stuff, but I thought there was nobody smarter, more thoughtful, and wanting to do more good for the people of the city of Colorado Springs and the Pikes Peak region than Richard.
Only he didn't get the title of the last vice mayor of Colorado Springs. That will forever be owned by Larry Smalls.
Oh, well, there you go.
That's great. That's a good trivia question for the next issue of Newport in the Rockies. So, hey, before we get started, I did want to point out that Representative Snyder is our first 3-time guest on We Have Issues. And so, again, we'll be sending you your new patch for your jacket so you can add that. And it's always nice to have you on here. So thank you for coming back and talking to us again.
I enjoy talking with you folks, and honored to be your first 3-timer.
Oh, boy. The famous last words, I don't know that there's anything honorable about this podcast, but hey, at least we have fun doing it.
Well, I had dinner last night with the candidate who's looking to replace Don Wilson, and he said he just recently had done a podcast with you.
Jarvis Caldwell? Yeah, Jarvis is a really good guy. I think he's going to be a thoughtful leader, and I think we're going to see great things out of him in the State House, and he's going to you've served there for a long time. How polarizing and divisive people have gotten there. And I think that he's going to be the kind of guy that kind of brings, maybe he's a pretty conservative guy, but going to bring some common sense and reasonableness back to the discussion.
Right. And he was a staffer for several years up there. I think he was an aide also. So it's not his first time at the Capitol. Let's put it that way.
I think he's gonna do really well. He's gonna be a good, solid replacement for Representative Wilson, who's done a great job.
Yeah. Is Jarvis unopposed in November?
Is he on the what?
Is he unopposed? Is he running unopposed at this point?
I don't think so. The Democrats put somebody up there, surely, but
okay.
I mean, it's
it's
one of those districts.
R district or something.
Yeah, it's kind of like Senate District 10. I mean, that just incredibly leans one way over the other, right?
You are correct, sir. But we're here to talk about Senate District 12.
Or 12, sorry.
Which is which is perhaps the most competitive race on this November's ballot. So,
and hence the reason why we wanted to have you guys on to talk to us. So, well, let's jump in.
Sure.
Mark, one of the things, and obviously some of these questions are going to be very similar for both of you, so we can kind of compare some things. But what would you say for you, if you get elected to the Senate next year, what's going to be your number one issue next year when the legislative session starts?
Well, I'm currently chair of the House Finance Committee, and have really drilled down on the state budget over the last several years, especially during the pandemic when we were home, on Zoom anyway. I attended all of that, and I really feel I thought we did great work last session. I thought we did even better work in the special session, but we still have a ways to go. So I know we put some controls and some caps in place, but we're going to have these continual budget problems until we put everything on the table: income tax, property tax, sales tax, some of the fees and everything else. I'd love to put all that on the table and come up with a sustainable way forward to fund the services and the things that the Colorado citizens deserve. It seems crazy to me that we're constantly dealing now with $2.5 billion in Tabor surplus every year, which has not historically been the case. Over history, it's been about half the time we had a Tabor surplus, but now we're seeing a kind of an upward trend. It just seems crazy to me that we're collecting all this excess revenue that we're not allowed to keep and have to return it to people. I think that's what led to all the tax credit bills last year, because it took a while for people to figure out, but that was a way that they could reduce the Tabor surplus and fund some of the projects that they wanted. But I think it's high time. I think I felt this way since we repealed Gallagher in 2020. So for me, go ahead.
Yeah, it's gonna say, do you think the legislature is going to be willing to put that Tabor issue on the ballot next year to be able to retain those revenues, or is that something that you're not going to be able to get done? Because it seems to me one of the big problems in this legislative session, this upcoming legislative session, is offsetting that backfill that was required by the compromise for the special session.
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think the voters have any appetite for messing with Tabor. Now, that doesn't mean a referendum C type approach with a temporary timeout.
Well, or a retention, just a retention of Tabor funds. I'm not getting rid of it, but just, hey, we want to retain these funds to spend on X, Y, and Z.
I would always keep that option on the table. I've learned from down here in El Paso County with our RTA and some of the success Colorado Springs has had with their 2C measures to keep excess revenues and apply it just to roads. But that RTA down here really taught me something. If you really specify what the money's going to go for and have an accountability measure in there so that you can come back to people in 2-5 years, however many years you're talking about, say, look, you gave us permission to keep this revenue. Here's exactly the things we did with the money. And that's a winning formula. It's worked for the RTA down here and pretty, tax averse El Paso County.
Well, we did it in the county, right? 5 Republican county commissioners put it to the ballot. I think it was in 2017, maybe, when we were working on funding for the GAP project, and passed that Tabor retention 2-1. 2-1.
And I think that all builds upon itself. And if people are not totally adverse to any increases, they just want to make sure the money's properly spent, properly supervised. So if you can build that case and build that trust, I think you're on your way.
And clearly it's not an increase, right? It is a retention of funds that are already there. Mm-hmm. Some people say, well, if you give it back and then I had to give it back to you, then somehow it's an increase. But really you've already paid your taxes. It's just keeping the dollars you've got. And I found that voters are smart. And if you're transparent, honest and open with them about how you're going to spend those dollars and then put those safeguards in like you're talking about, I think they do tend to support stuff like that.
And as a corollary to that, I would like to revisit the citizen initiative petition process. I know that both 50 and 108 were part of the grand compromise, and those were pulled down. I don't want to restrict the citizens' right to petition their government, but at the same time, it leads to some pretty uncomfortable results. I mean, the 50 and 108 had passed. We hadn't had the special session. It really could have had devastating consequences for school districts, local fire districts, library districts, state government, local governments. So I would like to have part of that. When I say bring everything onto the table, I'd like to include that also. But I think we've got plenty of revenue, plenty of economic activity. We're booming here in Colorado. But I think we need to plan for not just the next 5 years, but 10, 20 years out. Set up a process that would be sustainable, be able to weather the inevitable downturns, and allow us to, provide critical services when we do have a surplus situation.
So Mark, any specific changes to the petition process that you're thinking about? What would you change?
Well, I'm still thinking it through. I have to admit that the concurrent resolution that my colleague Mike Weissman brought to the House, it passed out of the House. You need 2/3 to put a ballot measure on. It got 44 right on the number. There was only one Democrat that voted against it, and that would be me. Not that I don't agree with the direction, because I believe that's the direction we need to go, is to work with local governments and make sure that these top-down statewide measures don't have disparate impacts. But such a diverse state we have in Colorado, what works in Jefferson County may not work in La Plata, or may not work in, Huerfano County. And so I think we'd have to have some local factor there. But I just really feel that would be the best thing I could participate and contribute towards. So while I did vote against that measure, which was kind of like an old Bernie Boucher proposal, it's not that I disagreed in principle. I just didn't think that was well thought out. It had enough time to be properly stakeholdered. And, we can't have different counties and different jurisdictions assessing different levels of property tax and what have you. I think if we take a thoughtful approach, we can get to a better place, and I'd be all for that.
Amen. So, so we're kind of talking about this, like, you're a representative going to come back next year to do this, but obviously this is a tough race, right? As you said, probably one of the closer seats in the state of Colorado. And so, you only get to go back and govern if you win this election. And so this is about two of you, and we're going to have your opponent on here in just a little bit to talk to him. But what sets you apart? What makes you the right guy for the voters to choose in this election?
Thank you for that question. And I have great appreciation for my opponent. So don't get me wrong. I appreciate his service in the military, his service in the county commission. But what I think sets me apart.
Wait, you didn't have to serve with him for 4 years. That's why you appreciate
Well,
it. I had to serve with him. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Our time in local government didn't overlap. I agree. My county commissioner was Sally Clark, who I have great admiration for. I don't always agree with her. Practically
saw and hugged her today.
Yeah, but she was a great representative for Commissioner District 3 and for my little town of Manatee.
You know what? Just a little side note, and I'm sorry to get us off track here, but actually, now that I think about it, she introduced you and I.
Did she?
She did.
That wouldn't surprise me, because she was very good at making
when all of the flooding was happening.
Oh, yeah.
Me and Rick Ramish, the Governor Hickenlooper staff, called me up and said, hey, would you, he's deploying his staff members out to tour the flooded areas. And he and I were together, and we met and talked with you as all that flooding was happening when you were the mayor of Manitou. Mm-hmm. And Sally Clark introduced us. All right. Sorry for that.
So Sally and I reminisced on that exact issue this morning at breakfast.
Yeah.
A little bit. So
anyway, what separates you?
Well, I think it really is my local experience, having worked my way up through open space chair to planning commission, city councilor, and Manitou mayor. and having served on every board and commission, literally in El Paso County, chair, council of governments, on the RTA board for 12 years, board of health, regional building. But when I left and got elected to go up to Denver, I promised my constituents that I would take my local knowledge and use that up there. So I've always been able to analyze bills and proposals up there to see if they're really going to work for the people down on the ground it's intended to help. And I've never been a fan of the so-called unfunded mandates. And so I've always had a special lookout for that. But I think it really helps me to be a better legislator, having had that local experience and have that lens to put all the things that you hear up there through. And I think being a mayor of a city is probably the best preparation you can have, because, you know, sometimes it's hard for citizens to reach their congresspeople, their senator, maybe even their state legislators. But by God, they can go down to City Hall and give you a piece of their mind every Tuesday night. And I think having that closeness has really served me well. Whereas I look at the county commission, you know, we've been such a Republican-dominated county commission for, 54 years since the last non-Republican served. I think they tend to get a little box themselves in with more politics and less common sense solutions. So I think that municipal experience really gives me that nonpartisan, how do we get things done? How do we make this better? How do we improve the lives of our constituents? Whereas I think any organization that is frankly one party dominated for such, half a century, they tend to get a little stale and a little bit kind of behind the times a little bit. They tend to think, well, we're El Paso County. We don't need to do this, that, or the other. We know how to, like the way we do things, we're going to keep doing it that way. And I think all elections and really all elected officials, we have to constantly be looking towards the future, building a future for the kids that are coming up, the young people that are getting jobs, starting careers. That's why the housing issues are so difficult, because that's one of the greatest ways to start accumulating wealth, even generational wealth. And a lot of young people are just being denied that now. So I really think that balanced experience that I have gives me a great perspective up there. I am not the most partisan of people. I will freely admit that. I'm a proud Democrat. I've been a Democrat all my life. But I'm very proud of my record. I would match my bipartisanship of the legislation that I've sponsored with anybody up there. We were going through it recently. It was surprising to me how many bills I have been a co-prime sponsor with Senator Gardner, who we're looking to fill his unfillable shoes, in my opinion. But I think
you just have to be a simple country lawyer to fill his shoes.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But I do think that local government nonpartisan experience is a real valuable asset to anybody looking to move into the state Senate. And if I'm elected, that's what I'll continue doing, what I've been doing for the last 6 years in the legislature, using that common sense knowledge that I've gained to represent the constituents of Senate District 12.
Hey, Mark, I wanted to jump into some specifics a little bit, and you touched on this a second ago. Obviously, you've been up there for 6 years now, I think, and so a lot of the issues affecting Colorado you've probably been dealing with them to a certain degree already, but I'm curious about affordable housing. This idea that you were talking about, being able to make home ownership attainable for young adults just getting started. Affordable housing has been an issue for as long as I've lived in Colorado Springs, which is over 30 years. I mean, it's been a topic. So what do you feel like has to start happening or keep happening for Colorado to keep moving in that direction, where we do have an opportunity to some truly affordable housing for young professionals and young families?
That's a great question. And I like the way you originally started by calling it attainable housing, because I do make a distinction between attainable housing and affordable housing. I tend to think of affordable housing more for the lower income folks that really are struggling. But I think we have to realize that it's all related. So when I talk about attainable housing, I ran a bill a couple years ago on behalf of CHAFA called the Middle Income Access Program. So what we were seeing was these young couples, maybe a firefighter, a school teacher, they have a combined gross salary of 130,000, maybe a little more. And usually a hard rule my whole time as a real estate attorney and now as wills and trusts has been a rule of three. You multiply that gross annual salary by three, that's the price for a home you can afford. But right now, how many homes can you find at 360,000? They're up to 450, even 550 now. So let's address that particular problem. These are not people that are needing some major subsidy in housing. They're doing all the right things that used to lead to home ownership and begin on that wealth generation. And they're losing that ability. So this was focused on that. And we realized that it's the land costs are one of the easiest and fastest ways we can help with promoting attainable housing. So the state through CHAFA will acquire the property, which is a big cost to the developer, big savings cost. And then they'll go ahead and develop their units and agree to sell them at 80% of market value. So those kinds of, that's just one small example. I mean, on the larger picture, it's a supply and demand issue, and we have not kept up with supply. Mayor Yemi today in his State of the City address, I believe he used we're short 23,000 housing units. And I do believe that there's a lot of options. Most of them are come with their share of controversy, whether you're talking ADUs, mother-in-law cottages. But I see great strides happening in manufactured housing. I visited a facility out in Buena Vista last year, a year before, where they're building these things at a much reduced cost and able to get these up, and they're fine quality homes, but I do think that we have to really take an all approach. I'm excited about the opportunities that came from Proposition 123. I was talking with some of our nonprofit housing developers just this morning, and they're really hoping to have a favorable result with one of their applications there. So I think the state is heading in the right direction. I want to say we were caught unawares, but that's not the case. We all knew after 2020 with the repeal of Gallagher, property taxes were going to be changing, especially on the residential side. And I think it's just a matter of building more housing. I also am very interested. I was working on a bill last year with Senator Gardner, and I hope to pick it up should I find my way to the Senate on construction defects, because that has really been the number one reason we're not building common interest ownership condominiums. And you can build the exact same apartment complex and the exact same condominium complex. The condominium complex costs you 5 times the amount in construction insurance than the apartment complex. So I think if we can somehow create what I favor is a right to cure period. So if a defect is discovered, the owner developer has a 30 or 90-day period in which to fix that defect. Probably needs to be done by a third party. If I'm a homeowner and the plumber messed up my plumbing, I'm not sure I want the same guy coming back to fix it. But I think there's things we can do that will ease and create the opportunity to build more attainable housing. And I consider condominiums, that was the first property I ever owned. I couldn't afford a single family home, but I could afford a condominium. I had a higher monthly with the common ownership fees and everything else, but I could make it. So I think there's a lot of tools in the toolbox.
Well, do you think we're ever going to get there, though? I mean, man, we've been trying to solve this construction defects issue since my time in the legislature 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, they had the grand compromise of 2017, which I've come to find out nobody was really satisfied with. Everybody thought they could live with it, but it hasn't moved the ball. Less than 5% of new builds in Colorado, and has been for several years, are condominiums.
And that's what we need. That's the answer. And also the other thing I would say is, I work a lot with my friends in the building industry, and regulation tends to be something that is adding to the cost of home ownership.
You're absolutely right. And several of my colleagues and I have been working on reducing the regulatory burdens. It's most prevalent, I think, so far in the professions. So we've really streamlined the way somebody, especially, and this really came from down here with all of our military families. You know, a soldier gets transferred to Fort Carson or Schriever, what have you, and their spouse comes along. He or she's a physical therapist, has a very good practice. They moved to Colorado, they had to start over and begin that application process. So we were able to streamline that. We've entered a lot of compacts with other states that if you're certified in another state, you can be easily certified here in Colorado. I think something similar to that is the direction we need to go. Because the regulatory, I just saw something recently, just an astronomical number of regulations Colorado has on the books. So I think we need to stand up a standing committee like we've done with tax expenditures and many other things that's just constantly looking at the regulatory environment and seeing where it's served its useful purpose or it's no longer beneficial and it's not really helping to police an industry or a profession.
Yeah, and making like the building regulations relevant to health, life, and safety, which is what they're supposed to be there for, and not, about other things that they shouldn't be about.
Right. And we can go all the way into the weeds about how new developments are financed with HOAs and
absolutely.
The developer has, control of that board sometimes for a decade or more. So there are other things that are worth looking at. And
don't even get me started on HOAs.
Yeah, that's I shouldn't even. I apologize. I shouldn't have.
Don't even get me started. I'll rant on that all day long.
We'll save that for the end of the episode.
Yeah, that's right.
But I do think all of those areas are ripe for a fresh look, and to make sure that we're sticking, like you said, life safety issues, habitability issues, not all the other little minor issues that, frankly, some of my colleagues from the Trial Lawyers Association are looking for. So I appreciate the trial lawyers. There is a time for people to step in when somebody's been aggrieved. One property owner against a large development concern, maybe building 10,000 homes. They don't have a lot of hand as far as trying to fight with the developer there. So I see a role for trial lawyers, but at the same time, the construction defects is just out of control. You find one defect in one unit and you can impart that defect to all the units.
Across the whole spectrum.
And
it's so I think there's a lot of room for improvement in that space. And we did have a compromise with the plaintiff's bar, I guess, as far as medical malpractice goes. They had a ballot measure that removed all caps. We had pretty low caps in place. I thought we came to a good compromise.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to another statewide issue a little bit. The water crisis. Again, I've lived here for over 30 years, maybe not quite as long as housing defects, but we've heard about the coming water crisis in Colorado. I think we've seen it in a lot of ways starting to hit. But what do you think the state can do to help alleviate that issue or remedy that issue as much as possible? But what has to happen over the next few years, even decades, to fix that?
You're absolutely right, Kyle. We have known this issue is out there, but then we'll have a couple of wet years and the reservoirs fill up and the river's running high again, and then we're able to just kind of push it off. But it's finally come home to roost. I mean, down here, and I have great respect for Colorado Springs Utilities. They've been very forward thinking. Even so, 80% of our water in the Pikes Peak region comes from the Colorado River, which that number just astounds me when you think about how far we are away and how many other users are drawing on that water. And we've seen it come home to roost because a dozen years ago, it seemed like we had unlimited land and unlimited water. And now we're in a situation where in the recent Amara proposal, that was a big issue. I mean, Fountain couldn't service them because they didn't have the water. And I think it was kind of a mixed opinion about whether Colorado Springs had the water to service that project. So land and water now have become scarce. I think there are things we can do. The Colorado Water Congress, which I've proud to have been part of bills that have funded that, whether through gambling revenues or other sources, to really come together and balance the needs. We are still a largely agricultural, farming and ranching state. They're still the primary users of that water, but now as urbanization and development occurs, especially along the Front Range, they're buying up these farmlands and these ranch lands and taking that water and using it for municipal purposes. And that's not a sustainable future for Colorado either. So I think we have to have all the right stakeholders at the table. And I think things like Kentucky bluegrass or maybe in the parks, that's fine. But I know even in my own personal house, I used to have 5 sprinkler zones for bluegrass, and I'm down to 3 now. So I've been every couple of years, I'll tear up one area, turn it into a xeriscape, put a drip irrigation in. And I think that is, there's all kinds of conservation techniques. And we've seen when Colorado Springs has gone into water restrictions, they never come back to pre-existing levels. People learn they can live with a lot less water. And we need to start we should have been started 10, 20 years ago. It's not too late, but we need to inculcate that ethic.
We could build those condos. Obviously they use a lot less water without yards, but we've had you on for a long time. We're kind of getting down to it here, but we have this is the last question for you. And actually, this is probably the most significant. Hope it's not a gotcha question anyway. We don't want it to be that at all. But with this seat in particular, you win this seat and everything else stays the same. Democrats now have a supermajority in the state Senate and the state House. Now, probably other seats are going to change somewhere along the lines, but obviously, Republicans are less relevant today than maybe they were in years past. I mean, to our own doing, our own undoing as a party in the state of Colorado. But how important do you see it? You win this seat and you're either in a supermajority or a near supermajority. Just how important is it to have a robust Republican conservative voice in order to create good policy for the people of the state of Colorado?
That's a great question, Mark. I don't think the supermajority has that much of an impact.
I agree with you there.
As I mentioned earlier, I was the lone Democratic no vote on a referring concurrent resolution to the ballot. I've always been pretty much an independent thinker. I'm not a party hack. I'm proud to be a Democrat, but I often have disagreements, not only with certain segments, sometimes with my entire caucus. And I'm not afraid to take that vote. I've shown that time and again. And as far as, it does have the ability to possibly override a gubernatorial veto. You can put measures on the ballot if you get a caucus in both chambers working in lockstep. But I would put it this way. I thought we had our most productive session in 2024 regular session in my 6 years. And there the Republicans were in a super minority. And yet we had the more bipartisan, more common sense legislation. So I think good leadership goes a long way. I haven't really added up the different seats and what things might happen. I tell people the supermajority issue, that's the Kevin Priola seat up north. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. Supermajority doesn't matter at all, right? I mean, when was the last time the legislature overcame a gubernatorial veto? The answer is never. And realistically, procedurally, that's almost next to impossible to happen because the legislature can't call themselves into session to overcome a gubernatorial veto. You can wait till after session's over, veto a piece of legislation, and you have no way to come back together as a legislature in order to overcome that veto, right?
And I would say also in the Senate, you don't have these, 9 to 4 committee membership makeups. Almost everything up there is 3 to 2, maybe a 5-4 or even a 5-3, but your vote in committee in that situation is much more important than it is in the House. I served on House Judiciary with a large Democratic majority on that committee. I thought, a lot of common sense, bipartisan legislation, and trying to flip 3 of my colleagues was near impossible. I could get one to vote with me, maybe sometimes a second, but it was a real challenge. So I think in the Senate, I think frankly, you would rather have a moderate centrist Democrat serving as that 5th member on a committee than maybe another Republican who's going to be one of the 2 as opposed to one of the 3. So I would humbly submit that despite the supermajority theory, that in the practice and the real workings every day of the legislature, I think it would be beneficial to have, frankly, humbly, somebody like me on a committee than another, staunch Republican whose votes are pretty much assumed.
Great. Well, Mark, thank you again for joining us for the 3rd time. We really appreciate it. Enjoyed talking to you. Real quick, where can voters in your district go to learn some more information about you and the issues you're most passionate about?
Well, I put my cell number on everything. And I invite people to call me at 719-233-1272. But we really
I can verify that's your actual number. I've called it a few times.
Yes, thank
to
you.
complain about shit that's happening in the legislature. No, I'm kidding.
And certainly our website at snyderforcolorado.com. We have all of our issues, and we try to keep it up to date as much as possible. This time of year, it's a bit of a challenge. As soon as we hang up here, I'll be changing into some door knocking clothes and knocking on some doors till dark.
You wearing out some shoe leather, are you?
I get a new pair of sneakers every election, and these are still in pretty good shape. They're starting to get scuffed up and starting to lose their bottom a little bit, but I think they're going to make it through to November 5th.
Well, Representative, as always, one of our favorite, obviously, one of our favorite guests to have on, because we've had you on so many times, but always appreciate the thoughtful engagement and the discussion, and, wish you all the success.
Well, thank you. I do feel I had many good people ahead of me who served in the legislature, served in other positions, like yourself and Senator Gardner, that have really been.
I was smart enough not to run for the Senate, though. So,
yes. Well, we all have our flaws. I guess that might be one of
mine.
That's right.
Thanks again, Mark. Take care.
Thanks, fellas. Really appreciate the time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Kyle, man, it's always great to hear from him.
It is. I've always enjoyed talking to Mark because, like you said, he's a thoughtful guy. I think he knows his stuff really well. And, I think he's in a tough spot. And I think part of the fact with Mark being fairly moderate helps him in the Pikes Peak region, because, at one point he was, I think, the only Democrat in the state legislature from down here, or maybe one of 2. And so this is a tough region for a Democrat to serve. And I think he's done a great job. I'm on the chamber PAC. I think the PAC feels like they can work really well with Mark on issues important down here.
Yeah. And I think he was actually endorsed by the Colorado Chamber, Casey, the Colorado Association of Commerce and Industry. It's a business-friendly group and typically endorses Republicans, but I think I think that they endorsed him in this race, so it'll be kind of interesting. Kyle, we're getting to that point in the show when we usually talk about stuff that pisses me off. A couple of things today. Number one, it's when podcasters say one thing at the beginning of their episode and then do something else. It seems to me in this particular episode, our plan was to have Representative Snyder on and then have Vanderwerf on right after him. But, we ended up going kind of long. We don't want this to be a hugely long episode. So I'm kind of the mind, maybe we ought to just let this episode stand on its own and then bring Commissioner Vanderwerf on next week to talk about why he's the right guy for Senate District 12.
I think that's a good idea. We did end up going a little bit longer with Mark than I think we planned. So
God, lawyer politicians, they can freaking just talk forever. Something else that pisses me off being a lawyer politician.
Oh, that's funny. So I think that's a good plan. And I think we're also going to change up the end of the episode a little bit today. Because I think for the first time so far, there may not be something pissing you off so much that we need to dive into it or you want to dive into it. But
yeah, well, here's the last thing that pisses me off. I'll just put it out there right now.
We do have something.
Yeah, I mean, it's when people tease stuff, especially, news media sources, everything's breaking news, or hey, this is going to be coming up, just hang in there and listen and watch, and then you'll be able to see it. That pisses me off royally, but guess what?
We're going to do it.
We've got some exciting news that we're not going to share with you today.
In a couple of weeks.
Please stay tuned in the coming weeks. We wish we could talk about it right now, but we can't. But we're really excited.
Yeah, I think this is going to be something that's a lot of fun, and I think people will enjoy quite a bit. So we will, again, probably in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to let the cat out of the bag.
Once we get all of this firmed up, let's hope everything works out, but it's going to be pretty awesome.
Great. Well, this is Kyle Blakely and Mark Waller again with another episode of We Have Issues. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll be back with Stan Vanderwerf next week. Thanks for joining us.